If it's happening in your country or around the world, Power 98.7 is your eyes and ears. Now we're talking.
So, turning our attention to something completely different now. One that could also affect your mental health, actually, come to think of it. A growing number of countries are turning against Israel over its military campaign in Gaza, applying mounting political, legal, and economic pressure. From the global south to major Western powers, governments are signaling a shift in stance, with some even threatening formal recognition of a Palestinian state unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and shows commitment to peace. Sanctions, diplomatic condemnation, and trade restrictions are all part of a widening international effort to push Israel toward halting its offensive. The public outcry, particularly after high-profile attacks such as an Israeli strike on a Catholic church, has added to the intensifying scrutiny. Right, let's delve into this. And joining us tonight, once again, we have from the senior research fellow at Africa Asia Dialogues, Thabiso. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Israeli journalist Ufa Naiman, who is out in Jerusalem. Are you, Ufa, at the moment?
Hi, thanks for having me, Titi.
Are you in Jerusalem? Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yes, I am.
Awesome. Good to have you with us as always, Ufa. Let me start with you. Some have described what is happening, the protests that we're seeing across the world with hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, people in stadia and, all kinds of locations that are all now voicing their displeasure and their objection and their condemnation of Israel's conduct. It's been described as something of the tide turning. Do you see it that way? Does it feel that way in Israel?
To me, it does, because when the world sees starving children, this is something even Western politicians, complicit, cynical Western politicians, can no longer ignore these images of starving children, and it's clear that the starvation is Israel's fault. These Western leaders are facing more and more pressure from their constituents, from the public, and some of them will also be facing electoral challenges. One example that comes to mind is the formation of a new party in the UK, headed by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, which is already doing better or almost as well as Labour under Keir Starmer in the polls. Furthermore, some of these Western politicians are legally complicit in the genocide, and they know that. They know that they may face justice at some point. And I think that what we're seeing is frantic efforts by some of these Western governments to reverse course and try to do something, however negligible it is, on Palestine, on the genocide in Gaza.
Mm. And, I've asked you this before, and I do wonder as well now, whether the images that are going around the world of the protests, you're also seeing clips that pop up every now and again on social media of Israeli tourists in other countries being thrown out of restaurants and all of that. I mean, this is quite serious stuff. And, what the government of Netanyahu is doing is actually now probably fueling, and it's not it now becomes seen as anti-Semitic racism, when in actual fact it's the world lashing out at the Israeli government. Amongst ordinary Israelis now, are they starting to see more of these images? Because you did say there is access to the information about what is happening in Gaza if people actually go out of their way to search for it within Israel.
So in recent weeks, Israeli media have started to show more images, horrific images or reports about what's going on in Gaza. It's still quite filtered. They will not call it a genocide. But apparently more and more Israelis are feeling the pressure. As you stated, tourists going specifically to places such as Greece. They face a lot of backlash. In some places, people just tell them that we don't want Israeli tourists here. Israeli elites, members of academia, university lecturers are facing stronger and stronger academic sanctions. And this has repercussions in the Israeli discourse. More and more Israelis are realizing that the war, from their perspective, what they call a war, the genocide, is a lost cause, and they stand to lose a lot from more and more international backlash and sanctions.
Thabiso Fagute, if I can bring you in as well into this conversation. Thabiso Fagute, Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues. What do you make now of this turning tide? You also see it that way? I mean, that people who had been silent or countries that had been silent are now suddenly finding their voices, which I see people, some are condemning as, being hypocritical and so on, or too little too late. But surely, when circumstances change, people are entitled to also change their minds. And the truth is that things have gotten progressively bad in Gaza.
Well, this is not progress. This is basically going 20 steps behind. You must remember that the two-state solution was rejected by a large number of Palestinians because what basis are you going to establish a Palestinian state? The Israeli government continues to occupy certain places, particularly in the West Bank, with a number of settlements coming up. So if you are to create a two-state solution, you're talking about small little townships in between. There's Israel. It's just impractical to have a Palestinian state, given the kind of geography and the spread of demographics at the moment in Palestine. There is no practicality. There's no possibility of establishing a Palestinian state because most of it, which was based on the 1967 borders, has been usurped and taken over by the Israelis and the right-wing settlers who are currently going on a rampage, killing the Palestinians. That's the first point. The second point is that you've got thousands, if not millions, of Palestinians who are living uncomfortably and oppressed in refugee camps around the Middle East, particularly in countries such as Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. These people are stateless. And they were kicked out of Israel, both 1948 and 1967. They are looking at going back to what? Because most of the areas that they originate from are now called Israel, particularly places such as what is known as Jaffa, for example, is now Tel Aviv. So there is that right of return of the Palestinians who are lingering in these refugee camps, who are looking at going back home. So when you start talking about a two-state solution, you're basically saying the right of return of the Palestinians must be thrown out of the window. That they can't go back to their homes. By the way, Gaza itself is largely a refugee camp. Most of the people in Gaza are refugees from what most people call Palestine 1948, or others call it Israel. So they are also looking, they still have the keys, by the way, of their homes. They're also looking at going back to their homes. In the West Bank is awash with refugee camps, and those people, again, were kicked out of their homes in what is now known as Israel. So the discussion at the moment of what we call progress and the acknowledgement by these countries that there's going to be a two-state solution is not good news for the Palestinians. The majority of the Palestinians are not excited about what you and I are discussing at the moment. The majority of the Palestinians do not see the viability of a Palestinian state because of these settlements. And again, the majority of the Palestinians who remain stateless and who remain in refugee camps outside Palestine want to go back home. So the solution for many people, including some of the Israelis, by the way, is a one state that will accommodate, I know it's a pipe dream, at least for now, one state that will accommodate everyone, Palestinians, Christian, Muslims, and Jews living in harmony like we did in South Africa.
Actually, I want to come back to that a little bit later. And it's something I wanted to put to offer as well. And then Thabiso, I just wonder about the role of the United States in all of this. And I mean, instead of taking a step back, it's Donald Trump is actually doubling down, threatening to withhold threatening tariffs against countries that condemn Israel, threatening additional tariffs against countries that condemn Israel or support the Palestinian. Well, they don't draw a distinction between Palestinian people and Hamas. There is that that element as well, and then the people of Palestine themselves. I mean, it is such a hopeless situation. One does wonder in the terms of how things have played out. What would be a best case scenario for them, the way things currently stand? I mean, at this stage, best case scenario is knowing where their next meal is going to come from.
Well,
yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Donald Trump, of course, is also he's a genocider. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden was a genocider. Donald Trump is a genocider. One can only hope that at some point Trump will grow tired of this crisis. Of course, it's a genocide. That's the most important word. But for Trump, it's a pain, a pain in the ass. It's a crisis for him. Hopefully, at some point, he will grow tired of this and pressure Netanyahu to stop the war, because otherwise Netanyahu will just continue to double down. He has his own. We can elaborate on that. He has his own interest in political survival through an ongoing war. But beyond that, and this is sort of a silver lining, we're seeing the rise of strong opposition to Israel within the Mhanga movement, the pro-Trump Mhanga movement in the U.S., especially among young Republicans. That's a new phenomenon, and we know for a fact that even Netanyahu is alarmed by this development because his entire politics is based on having blanket support from the Republican Party and pretty much from the Democratic Party for Israeli policies. And this has been the case for decades. But now we're seeing the rise of prominent opposition within the Democrats, including members of Congress. But on top of that, that's the newer phenomenon. Young Republicans, young MAGA Republicans who are tired of Israel, they see the images from Gaza, they see it as a genocide, and they hate the fact that the U.S. is arming Israel, sending billions upon billions of dollars to Israel at the expense of the American taxpayer. And it seems that Trump is aware of the rise of this movement. Apparently, he has warned Netanyahu that he is under pressure from his own political base within the United States, more and more people who are fed up with Israeli policies.
Dr. Thabiso, if I could take you to jump in on that one as well, the same, just to get your perspective in terms of what it takes, because it's clear, and everybody around the world has been saying that as things stand, there's actually only one man that can put a stop to all of this, and that's Trump.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, we're hearing stories or reports today that Benjamin Netanyahu is planning another incursion. He's planning on sending more troops into finishing the job in inverted commas in Gaza. So this is the man who doesn't really care anymore. He was caring for a while when Trump assumed his presidency, that is Trump 2.0. But now you have the Israeli public that is in support. The majority of the Israelis support the war in Gaza. Well, now you've got a growing number of them who are protesting, saying the war must stop, but they want the war to stop because of the captives that are currently in Gaza. But there is a sizable support, and that's what gives an emboldened, continue to embolden Benjamin Netanyahu to continue with his barbarism of killing women and children and suffocating them and shooting those that are queuing for food. And unfortunately, when the dust settles, the people who are going to carry this can for a very, very long time to come, it's going to be the Israelis themselves. And I'm glad that you've got the Jewish formations and other Jews around the world who are condemning this, because that, to an extent, for me at least, it does say not in our name, not all Jewish people were part and parcel of this evil. But what we see at the moment in Israel, at least inside Israel, is an absolute support of what's been going on. And now, of course, they're speaking. But again, the information is not trickling through because international media is barred from going to Gaza and covering what's going on there. And the Israelis are getting what is produced and controlled by the Israeli forces and Benjamin Netanyahu himself. So at the end of the day, what you're going to have a generation after generation of Israelis who are going to suffer because of the sins of their fathers, and mainly because of Benjamin Netanyahu.
And is that, Oppenheimer, does that, I wonder whether that's not something, that Israelis have lived for so long with this fear and with this, this vow that was made that never again, that it seems to me like there is no... Don't they at any point think about life without this conflict and a peaceful coexistence with the Palestinians, rather than trying to completely eliminate them and seeing that as a way of securing themselves? That this actually just leads to more resentment. There's another generation of young children, those who will survive this awful ordeal, that will know nothing but Israeli terror.
Yeah, so there's a genocidal mindset here, and it's not so new. We should bear in mind that Israel was created in 1948 through the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the Nakba, including massacres and crimes against humanity committed by Israeli forces against Palestinians. And there's this mentality here of former Prime Minister Ehud Barak called it Israel a villa in the jungle. And I think this is something that can resonate perhaps with South African listeners going back to the days of apartheid and how perhaps a certain ruling white elite regarded their own presence in the continent. Us sort of European enlightened forces versus primitive barbarians and so on. And this is not going away. However, Israelis are vulnerable to various forms of pressure. Israelis are used to high standards of living, to open bridges with the world, especially the West, and this makes them vulnerable to international pressure, which can weaken Israeli society and challenge all these convictions tremendously.
Yeah. And this is why it's always very interesting now that we always told about this far right that's got a hold on Donald Trump, on Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Israeli public's view and the way that they view Netanyahu. There's been a lot of anger around about the fact that people saying not enough is being done to bring the hostages home. And if anything, if some of his reports are anything to go by, it actually seems as if that whole mission has been abandoned, and it's just now a scorched earth kind of approach, like leave nothing, even if they don't recover those. What talk is there? Are there still those daily protests by the families of the remaining hostages, those that are dead or alive?
So after the partial exchange deal earlier this year, the protest became weaker. But now we're seeing some increased protest, especially last week after footage of Israeli captives in bad condition was published in Israel. So there's a fairly strong movement in favor of a deal, and these people now, unlike last year, are now more explicit about their demand to actually end the war. However, when it comes to their core beliefs, and these are mostly, you can call them mainstream liberal Zionists, as opposed to the Israeli right wing, when it comes to their core beliefs, they too are racist. And even if they support an end to the war, they are not likely to take firm action to actually stop the war, by calling for refusal, by refusing themselves, by going down to the border and trying to actually block the soldiers going into Gaza because of sort of deep convictions that are not too different though of the Israeli right wing.
And I do think that if there is an illustration, a perfect illustration of the racism that you referred to, the blatant racism, is the attacks that happen in the West Bank, where, at least to my understanding, there isn't any meaningful or serious presence of Hamas, because anyway, that was the area of Israel that was under control of the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Hamas is an excuse. Nowadays, it's an excuse in Gaza too. In Gaza, the agenda for Israel is ethnic cleansing. And in the West Bank, it's under the control of the Palestinian Authority, which is effectively a collaborator with Israel. There is some resistance there in the West Bank, especially in the refugee camps. And Israel is hell-bent on maintaining absolute control of the West Bank, expanding settlements, and we're seeing more and more settler violence, which is actually Israeli state violence because they are supported by the military, doing things which were unimaginable prior to October 7th, 2023, settlers going into small Palestinian villages and basically driving out the population with the support of the Israeli military. And we're seeing the Israeli military raising entire blocks and neighborhoods within Palestinian refugee camps to make it easier for Israel to control those camps. So the idea here is to preserve this structure of total Israeli control, expanding settlements, including ethnic cleansing within the West Bank, driving out small Palestinian communities, forcing them to move to Palestinian towns and expand Israeli control there.
Thabiso Faguta, you've already expressed yourself. By the way, it's a power perspective on Power 98.7. We're talking about the latest development coming out of Israel. Is the tide turning with protests that are taking place on a daily basis around the world in condemnation of what Israel is doing? So my guest, Ofer Naiman, who's an Israeli journalist on the line to us from Jerusalem, and Thabiso Faguta, who is a senior research fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues. So there was this conference, Thabiso Faguta, that took place that was, supposedly looking into, they're trying to either restart or get some serious discussions around this two-state solution going again. Of course, the United States and Israel had boycotted it. What then do you make of that gathering? Was it just a monumental waste of time, or was there any good that can come of it?
Well, nothing was going to come out of it, and it's also a waste of time, as I've said. This two-state solution collapsed a long time ago, and most Palestinians don't really even entertain the idea anymore because, as I've said, the demarcations of what a Palestinian state is going to be makes it totally impractical to even form a state. You have to, Donald Trump, in his suggestion, that is Donald Trump 1.0, he was suggesting having bridges and highways that will go across the settlements in the West Bank, linking Gaza and other towns and cities in the West Bank, and that will be that was his understanding, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, of what the Palestinian state was going to be, because it's simply impossible. Imagine, if you know how Soweto is structured, you have Mdeni as Palestinian state and Zola and Jablan is Israel, and then you've got Dobsonville, that is another Palestinian state, and then Midlands is Israel. How are you going to even begin to establish a state in such a manner? That's the first point. The second point is, as I've said, there are millions or thousands of human beings who are in refugee camps, and these people are stateless. They don't have passports to travel, particularly in places such as Lebanon and Jordan and Syria, who are refugees, who want to be recognized and who want to go back to their homeland, which, by the way, were kicked out not too long ago. And the other thing that we need to remember and mention, this is a third ethnic cleansing that is notable. I think there were a lot of other smaller ones, but in 1948 you had mass kicking out of the Palestinians or ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. In 1967, there was something similar. And now this is the third one. But in between that, there were a lot of other ethnic cleansing, although minor, but there were a lot of other ethnic cleansing of forcibly removing the Palestinians from their land. So that has to be rectified. Now, when you talk about the two-state solution, it just simply won't fly with many Palestinians, particularly those that are in refugee camps, not only, by the way, in these countries I've just mentioned, but inside Gaza, inside the West Bank, and those that are stateless and not recognized, particularly the Bedouins, in what is now known as Israel, who also are continually being removed and forcibly removed, and now, of course, they're killed by these right-wing madmen and women who don't see them as human beings. So the two-state solution is a waste of time, and this is why I do believe strongly that even that meeting was an absolute waste of time, to us sanctioned by people who accepted this two-state nonsense in the first place, which is the representative of Fatah and Palestinian Authority within the United Nations. But the majority of the Palestinians, particularly those who think and who understand politics and the reality of the demographics and geography of what the two-state solution means, don't entertain this discussion. So you are likely, again, to have a continuation of the struggle, even if these countries and big countries do agree. But you're going to see in the next couple of weeks more and more Palestinians protesting this idea of a two-state solution. And this is why, of course, it's also offensive to the Israelis when the chants of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, because people are now seeing this as a reality. River meaning the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. And that is what is now known as Israeli proper. So many people are now pushing for a South African kind of solution where we all live together and try and we're going to try and continually, as we're doing in this country, make up and try and live together. Because if you're going to be continuing with this mantra and repeating this two-state solution, which is not necessarily a preference of many Palestinians, particularly those who are in refugee camps.
Is that even a possibility? I mean, by all accounts, this is not even something that the majority of Israelis, certainly not the right-wing coalition that's currently in government, would even entertain. I mean, the idea that Israel could find, a South African-type solution, where, I mean, is the enmity too great for such a prospect of actually Israelis and Palestinians living in one state?
So I'm interested in what people in Gaza think, and perhaps many of them right now don't want to live with Israelis after this genocide. Perhaps as a result, some of them would support a two-state solution, but then I absolutely agree that this two-state solution does not solve all the basic problems here created by Zionist settler colonialism. So there's a certain catch here. But after this genocide, it's hard to imagine. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying it's hard to imagine Palestinians, especially in Gaza, wanting to live with Israelis. But I, as an Israeli, as a privileged Israeli citizen, would never say that as an excuse to support and accept any privilege here and any tenets of Israeli apartheid and Israeli settler colonialism. So overall, I think that we need to keep working to end Zionism here, to abolish Zionism, to uphold the rights of Palestinian refugees. I do believe in working for a one-state solution. I think that it would also require sending lots of people to prison for committing lots of Israeli genocide criminals to prison for the crimes that they have committed. Perhaps this will create some opening for a better shared future here.
All right, it's about perspective. Let's take one or two calls before we have to wrap up with my guest. Since we wanted to before I get some closing remarks from them, let's go to Nick in Pretoria. Nice and quick for me, Nick.
Yes, good evening. My comment is that United Nations is not taking action against Israel. They are not imposing sanctions like maybe banning it from participating in the World Cup or banning it from participating in the Olympics, or ban it from participating in any world events. If they can do the kind of punishment they gave to South Africa, it will help to put pressure on Israel, because America is protecting Israel. And if maybe America is also protecting Israel, it's difficult to stop the genocide and the killing of Palestinians. So I think maybe what the United Nations needs to physically, or countries need to put like sanctions against Israel, so that Israel is isolated, and to send out a clear message, because if this happens, Israel gets away with it, then other countries will also be doing the same thing, because they are friends of America. So I think the United Nations needs to send sanctions on Israel, just like they are sending sanctions on Russia. They are sanctioning Russia, but they are leaving Israel. They're saying Israel is right, but yet they are punishing Russia for invading Ukraine. So United Nations needs to impose sanctions on Israel, so that it's isolated. They mustn't participate in any World Cup, in any sport, so that they are isolated until they stop killing Palestinians and give Palestinians their land, and to leave Palestinians land alone. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick, for that. Let me get some thoughts as we wrap up with Thabiso and Ofenaiman. Thabiso, I mean, is anyone even paying any attention to what the UN says anymore about any conflicts, really, given how, powerless, that structure, that whole Security Council veto just neuters the entire body?
Yes, the United Nations is now only good for relief work. But in terms of political work, where there's United Nations Security Council that has 5 permanent members who vetoes anything that's suggested by anyone, makes that particular platform really moribund and useless. You're also now going to have this gathering happening in the next month in September of all countries coming in and expressing their views about how they see the world going. Again, that's just a waste of time as far as many people are concerned, and some of us are observing from afar. So you have countries that continue to encourage Israel in the form of United States and often Britain, France, and others, who have notwithstanding their power and influence within the United Nations Security Council, who have said nothing, and who continue suggesting these archaic suggestions of two-state solutions, and others are just quiet, particularly China, that sits at the Security Council, and others are, of course, suggesting this two-state solution. So the United Nations has lost its relevance, and this is why you have countries now embracing a go-it-alone attitude. Trump has rendered United Nations even more useless, because he issues executive orders that are detrimental to the peace and security of the world. The fact that he came up with this very destabilizing foreign policy of tariffs and trade war, one would have expected that the United Nations would have taken a much more firmer position in this regard, but they said absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And what you see a go-it-alone attitude from many countries in trying to deal with Donald Trump. So when it comes to Israel, I don't see the United Nations doing anything. They're not going to stop. There are thousands of actions that have been taken, and dozens of resolutions that were taken against the state of Israel, but things are continuing as they were, and Israel ignores all of those injunctions and resolutions that are taken at the United Nations, and it continues to do as it pleases.
Yeah. Often, Israel has never really paid any attention to the United Nations. As always ignored United Nations resolutions. They've accused them of being anti-Semitic, and all sorts. So a complete irrelevance as far as Israel's government is concerned.
Yeah, as for the United Nations, of course, when it comes to the Security Council, for now it's hopeless. However, some people are telling us that there is a path for action through the United Nations General Assembly, where the U.S. has no veto power. And there are some campaigns working towards a General Assembly resolution on Israel, which will have some way of coercing, of bringing about a change here. But until that happens, we need to work at the grassroots level and at the institutional and government level. And again, there is some hope there. When it comes to the BDS campaign, boycott, divestment, sanctions, things that seemed unattainable in the past are now within reach. So just to give us some hope, for example, yesterday we learned that the Ballet and Opera, the British Royal Ballet and Opera, have now cancelled their performance in Israel next year, which is a huge BDS achievement. Today we learned that a German football club will not sign an Israeli player, a German, where Israel is very still popular in Germany, due to this Israeli football player's racist and genocidal statements over the past few years. Beyond that, there is talk, and we've yet to see, of European governments imposing some sanctions on Israel, some academic sanctions on funding of scientific projects in Israel. So some things are moving. Of course, when it comes to the United Nations, it's much harder to bring about change.
Offenheim, Israeli journalist on the line from Jerusalem. As always, thank you so much for your perspective from inside the belly of the beast, so to speak. Really appreciate your time. Good night. Thank you so much. And of course to you too, Thabiso. Appreciate your insights as well and your very forthright analysis of the situation. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much for having me.
There you go. He's a senior research fellow of the Africa-Asia Dialogues.